ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Hi friends, it's Justin Brierley. Before we jump into today's show, I've some exciting news to share. The evidence for a rebirth of belief in God in the UK and beyond has been growing. Easter saw thousands of churches packed out, surveys are showing a remarkable upturn in church-going, and people are looking for God again. I believe the church is in a unique missional moment, and that's why I'd like to invite you to a conference, Responding to the Rebirth, taking place at All Souls Church London on Saturday the 22nd of November. Co-hosted by myself and Glenn Scrivener of Speak Life, we'll be joined by some very special guests and speakers as we help the church to be ready for this turning of the tide. This conference is for any Christian who wants to respond to the rebirth we're seeing. Ticketing will be available soon, but for now, mark your diary and plan to be with us on Saturday, the 22nd of November in London. More details to follow soon. For now, here's today's show.
Apologise for interrupting our regular broadcast, but we bring you breaking news here on RT. A major fire has broken out at the world-famous Notre Dame Cathedral in central Paris, and here we can show you the latest pictures.
Tonight, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is completely engulfed by fire. The flames appear to have started in the roof where extensive renovation work was being carried out. They quickly took hold. The cathedral's spire collapsed into the building. It's feared very little has been saved. Huge crowds gathered in the streets around it. Many were in tears.
Fire crews from across Paris have come here to save whatever they possibly can. And the striking thing, standing among the crowds on the banks of the Seine, is just the silence, the quiet of people stunned by the destruction of not just a great French cultural artefact, but of one that belonged to the world.
When weeping Parisians watched Notre Dame, the city's beloved 800-year-old cathedral, being consumed by a devastating fire in 2019, it served as a sad symbol, not only of the loss of an iconic building, but the loss of something much greater.
I never thought I would live through something like this. I never thought that I would personally feel that separation of a work of art that you assumed would always be there, would see me born, it would see me die. I never thought I would outlive a great work of art.
Just that image conjured up so much. This building, which has survived world wars and revolutions and 8 centuries of history, and it was like something very precious to the Western soul was burning up before our eyes.
Perhaps more than anything, the burning of Notre Dame reflected the secularization that had overtaken France in the past few hundred years. Ever since revolutionaries overthrew the rule of both the monarchy and the church in the 1700s, a precipitous decline in Catholic faith has been underway in the country. For generations, France has been a famously secular culture. Over half the population now say they have no religion, and church-going has been at an historic low for decades. Alongside secularization, Islam has been growing with the influx of migrant communities to France, making the loss of Christian identity in the country even more pronounced. However, rebirth often happens against all the odds. And just before Christmas last year, Notre Dame's bells rang out again.
In the last hour, the world has got its first look inside the restored Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. President Emmanuel Macron is visiting the cathedral ahead of its official reopening next weekend, more than 5 years after it was devastated by fire.
With a ritual knocking, the Archbishop of Paris marked the reopening of Notre Dame Saturday night, just 5 years after the fire. unveiling a restoration perhaps as extraordinary as was the destruction itself.
A remarkable reconstruction project saw a transformed cathedral rise from the ashes. The stained glass windows and original stones of Notre Dame now glowed luminously after centuries of grime were removed. And the building has been packed with worshippers and visitors ever since. But many also see the restoration of Notre Dame as symbolic of a growing sense that the Catholic faith is also being renewed in France.
What do you want the restoration of Notre Dame to represent, not just for Christians here in Paris and in France, but for Christians and believers throughout the world?
It means like a renewal of the faith, because we are the whole continent where the faith is like dying a little bit, or at least we have the impression that it's from the past.
Do you think perhaps some people will even appreciate it more now that they almost lost it?
I'm sure, yeah. And that they will feel it's not only about the building, but about the Virgin Mary and God that we are praising, celebrating there.
France's Catholic Church has been living through many barren years, as has Roman Catholicism in many other parts of the world, and arguably not without cause. As well as institutional failings of the past, contemporary scandals around child abuse and cover-ups have severely damaged the reputation of the Church and contributed to falling adherence across the West. Indeed, many have described a Catholic Church in crisis in a post-Christian world. Yet in recent years, the headlines haven't always been so negative. Many saw Pope Francis as a positive example of compassionate and down-to-earth leadership. Following his death at Easter this year, the world's eyes turned again to Vatican City. When white smoke heralded the election of Pope Leo XIV, there were plenty of political hot takes on what the papacy of the first US cardinal will mean for the world. But the celebration and hope on display by the faithful in St. Peter's Basilica also perhaps marks the beginning of a new era for Catholicism. Because, by many accounts, the Catholic Church itself seems to be on the verge of a revival as unlikely as the rebirth of Notre Dame from the ashes.
There is something attractive to these students about the fact that this is a very ancient tradition.
Nietzsche said that God is dead. God said that Nietzsche is dead. One of them was right. It turns out the old eternal questions, they remain.
So it was only really when I was an atheist I started grappling with the Bible as a way of arguing against it. I actually got face to face with actual Christian belief. I mean, I often attend the Latin Mass. You see a lot of young people there, and there is a hunger for traditional liturgy.
And that's what's happening, I think, is the more we emphasize, as you say, the weirdness of Christianity in its doctrinal claims, in its manner of presenting itself to the world, it'll be more compelling, not less.
Today we explore the surprising turn in the Catholic Church from crisis to confidence as a new generation discovers an ancient church. I'm Justin Brierley, and in this podcast series I'm bringing you the inside account of why a meaning crisis in the modern world and the search for a better story about life are leading many 21st century people to reconsider Christian faith. Welcome back to Season 2 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Episode 12, The Catholic Revival.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
About 12,000 adults and teenagers were baptized on the day before Easter. This is a record number for a country like France, where almost half of the population says they do not believe in God. However, the latest data from the French Bishops' Conference show that despite this secularization, the number of people who are seeking to be baptized in the Catholic faith continues to increase. During the Easter Vigil, about 7,000 adults and more than 5,000 teenagers were baptized.
Muchas personas de mi edad.
Many people my age, 55 and older, find themselves feeling empty, and young people are searching. A secularized society is a society in which there is an emptiness, but there is also a search for meaning, for a zest for life. And today's young people are asking themselves, but what am I living for?
News of a remarkable upturn in adult and teenage baptisms in the Catholic Church in France made headlines last year when 12,000, the largest number in living memory, came forward to be received into the church. But remarkably, it was surpassed again at the Easter Vigil this year with a 45% rise, as almost 18,000 catechumens were baptized. And in both years, the most unlikely age demographic are the ones most coming forward.
Who were the converts? It was driven mostly by young people, people under the age of 25.
This is political commentator Michael Knowles, who came back to Catholic faith himself in his 20s, describing the surprising results from France.
45% increase among adults compared to last year, 33% rise among adolescents. So you're seeing a big drive here from young people. Now, part of this might be because fewer adults were baptized when they were babies by their parents. 2 generations ago, everyone would be baptized even if you didn't believe in it. Today, a lot of parents, Gen X parents, millennial parents, even boomer parents, just didn't baptize their kids because they don't believe in it. What's the point? You know, church is just like every other day of the week. It's all kind of fake. It's all happy clappy kind of. It's for me. It's to entertain me, but it's not that entertaining. So whatever. Why would I give any credence or participation to it? And then those kids grew up and they decided they want to be baptized. They received grace, I think, and in any case, they become baptized. In other words, Nietzsche said that God is dead. God said that Nietzsche's dead. One of them was right. It turns out the old eternal questions, they remain.
But it's not just France that is seeing this unexpected revival among young people. Reports of rising numbers have been coming in from the Catholic Church in other parts of Europe, such as Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And in my own country, the UK, the recent publication of The Quiet Revival, a landmark report from the Bible Society on rising church attendance among Gen Z, showed that Catholic churches were among those seeing the most young people returning to the pews. Speaking at World Youth Day 2023, which saw some 1.5 million pilgrims gather for Mass and an overnight vigil in Lisbon, Portugal, Bishop Robert Barron explained why young people are looking for a serious faith.
I think it is tougher being a young person now, and the pandemic had a lot to do with it, but also the rise of the social media in its negative aspect. I love the social media, I use it, but it's got a very negative aspect. And these young people, they know this. The numbers of anxiety and depression, suicidal tendencies are all spiking among young people. And a lot of it's related to the social media. I want them to come away with a sense of, that world, you can use it, it's a tool, but that's not the real world. The real world is the world of the worship of God, the service of the poor, communion with one another. And that's what this day is all about, It's tougher being a young person now than it was when John Paul started these things a long time ago. It's tougher now, which means we need Christ more than ever. And I want them to come away with a sense of Jesus who loves them, who walks with them, and wants to be the Lord of their life in a liberating way. If that message comes through, we got some good for them.
The Catholic Church lays claim to a direct line of apostolic succession since the 1st century, when St. Peter was first entrusted by Christ with the task of leading the Church. It has a long and sometimes turbulent history, but one which has shaped the history of many nations and the lives of countless generations. With its relatively unchanging traditions and moral teachings that span continents and whole civilizations, it has been a symbol of permanence in a fast-changing world. Throughout this podcast series, we've charted the way the changes in our world have intensified in recent years as technology, social media, and the rapid advance of ideologies on both the left and right have accelerated a meaning crisis in culture, often with young people at the epicenter. Post-Christian societies like France have sidelined the church and its central story for centuries, which is why the boom that the country is beginning to see in Catholic circles is so surprising. This is, after all, the famously secular country that chose to include what appeared to be a drag queen parody of the Last Supper during the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Paris.
They haven't been without controversy. We had that disastrous opening ceremony that saw world leaders left out in the rain. There were technical problems. They were mocking Christianity, including drag queens parodying the Last Supper.
The scene is clearly referencing the Last Supper. The name of the tableau was a wordplay in French, which is La scène de la Seine à Paris sur la Seine. Basically, if you translate it into English, it means the scene of the Last Supper on the Seine River.
What do I see but this gross mockery of the Last Supper? France felt evidently, as it's trying to put its best cultural foot forward, the right thing to do is to mock this very central moment in Christianity. France, which used to be called the eldest daughter of the church, Paris that gave us Thomas Aquinas taught there, and Vincent de Paul was there, King Louis IX, St. Louis, France that sent Catholic missionaries all over the world. France, whose culture, and I mean the honoring of the individual and of human rights and of freedom, is grounded very much in Christianity, felt the right thing to do was to mock the Christian faith. You know, a question I would pose, we all know the answer to it. Would they ever have dared mock Islam in a similar way?
I asked Tony Wilson, a British writer and broadcaster who spends much of the year in France, about how that infamous ceremony was received by the people he lives alongside.
The opening festival of the Olympic Games was a bit of a flop in many respects for France, and I think people acknowledge that generally. It was the biggest recruiter for Marine Le Pen ever, I think, because she was tweeting as soon as before the event was over. And because, like many producers of events like that, they're coming from a pretty liberal perspective, and they can't stop themselves poking the bear. You know, they just constantly want to poke at what they see as irrational, old ideas that have had their time. How far those views, those ultra-liberal views, extend into France, I somehow doubt. I really don't feel that they express the France that I live amongst, the French people I live near.
I asked Wilson, himself a convert to Catholicism, what he makes of the surprising number of young people entering the church in France.
I think it fits well with your thesis that we're seeing the tide turning. I think those signs are there. I think the data is there that the number of people, the number of adults seeking baptism who've come from no faith commitment at all has gone up. And so that is certainly true. I mean, even in our own parish, we've got a young man, Marvin. He's just appeared from nowhere. He's come from no faith background, and he's being baptised this Easter. So even in our ageing rural parish, there are people turning up at the door.
There's no doubt that some of the new interest in Christianity in France is driven by cultural and political concerns. We began this season exploring the overlap of conservative politics with the rebirth of interest in faith. France has had long-running tensions between a growing Islamic population and the secular values of its republic.
We've avenged the Prophet Muhammad, heard clearly in dramatic new footage showing Islamist militants Sharif and Saeed Kouachi moments after the Charlie Hebdo massacre.
This is an act of an exceptional barbarism that has just happened here in Paris against a newspaper.
It had been 40 minutes since the concert began. We heard detonations coming from behind and heard screams.
The worst of the attacks unfolded here inside the Bataclan Theatre, where 3 terrorists in suicide vests burst into a packed concert and opened fire on the crowd. In all, 90 people were killed in the rampage.
Tragic events such as the 2015 Charlie Hebdo killings and the Bataclan massacre in Paris, along with a spate of arson attacks on churches attributed to Islamic extremists, have only intensified the tensions. It's perhaps inevitable that some of those concerned by the rise of Islam are looking for identity markers that offer more than the secular humanism of the state government. The same forces that are contributing to the rise of Marine Le Pen's far-right nationalist party may also be propelling some towards traditional Catholicism. Tony Wilson is familiar with the mixed motives and complex cultural dynamics at play, but says that what he mostly sees is genuine spiritual renewal responding to a spiritual hunger, especially among the young. Over the past year, he's been charting the explosive growth of a Catholic student ministry in Toulouse, a city in southern France. It began when the leader of a Catholic mission network asked him a favour.
I happened to drop into the conversation. He said, there's a new young ordinand. He's in training in Toulouse at the moment, Antoine. And would you just occasionally just go and support him, just take him out for lunch? And so I thought, right, okay, well, I'll do that. So I popped into Toulouse and made an appointment to take him to lunch. And far away from it being an encouragement from me to him, it was the other way around. You know, the encouragement was all going the other way. And so we went to his ordination, and the roof practically lifted off the cathedral. It was the most amazing event I think I can imagine going to, really. It was quite extraordinary. His bishop, Guy de Kerimel, put Father Antoine in the team with Father Damien, who are responsible for the student mission. The student mission actually started about 15 years ago. So it's been something that's been gathering some pace.
Seeing a missional opportunity, the Diocese of Toulouse has purchased and is in the process of redeveloping a former convent in the city as a student outreach centre, and has repurposed 6 parish churches in student areas for evangelism and discipling of young people. Wilson says that Father Damien and Father Antoine, who lead the work, are encountering unprecedented openness among the student population.
Father Antoine tells me, he's stopped in the street by people asking if they can be baptised. Their numbers of people enrolling in the programme which leads to baptism has gone up. Now I think the latest number is 240 since the start of this academic year. So it's a significant number of students. And their friends are bringing their friends, and their friends are bringing their friends as well, to what is a fairly traditional Mass. There aren't really any concessions to them being students. Their view is that they're going to do liturgy, they're going to do it very well, and they're going to have their robes, they're going to have their incense, they will have polyphonic singing, they will do everything according to the rubrics of the Catholic Church, and yet it seems to be very, very popular. And I spent a very pleasant breakfast period with Father Damien, where he was explaining how they worked. And I'd already been in morning prayer with him. And at the end of breakfast, he said, you'll have to excuse me, I've got an important meeting in an hour and I must go back and pray. So the whole thing is very underpinned by a deep personal commitment. They have a daily hour of adoration, which both he, Father Damien, and Father Antoine lead with the students. So that's a period of silent prayer in the church where those priests are available to hear the confessions of the students. And those 2 priests are carrying a huge weight on their shoulders, actually. And they understand it, and they know that if they're not absolutely steeped in prayer, that they would go under.
Hearing Wilson's account of the way that the traditional Mass and high church liturgical ceremony is drawing young converts, I couldn't help be reminded of the many occasions I've encountered those in the surprising rebirth movement encouraging churches to keep Christianity weird. Those looking for a spiritual home today aren't necessarily looking for the pop culture seeker-sensitive form of church that the boomers and Gen X converts built. Within the Catholic Church, attempts at accommodating modern culture in some of the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s and 70s never seemed to move the dial on the emptying out of churches by young people. In contrast, however, the recent growth of a trad Catholic movement among younger people has been reported on by outlets such as Vanity Fair and the New York Times, including a return to the Latin Mass and a tradition even of young women wearing veils. Rusty Reno, editor of First Things magazine, told me why he thinks young people are being drawn towards Catholicism and some of its surprisingly traditional customs.
Baby boomers like me have created a liquid world with no firm place to stand for young people. I mean, we've deconstructed marriage. We've ruined the traditional patterns for male-female interaction so that there's no courtship. I mean, even the word courtship is alien to an 18-year-old. He or she wouldn't even know what I was talking about. We've undermined the foundations for economic prosperity for kind of middle-class people through globalization. We've tolerated dramatic demographic change in our societies. So we've liquefied. Baby boomers have embraced and created a liquid world. And in that world, a young person is desperate to find a solid place to stand. And if the Latin Mass, it doesn't go back to the time of Jesus, right? It's a synthesis of liturgies after the Council of Trent. But it is a strange ancient language conducted with dignity, and it radiates a kind of permanence and depths of roots that would be naturally attractive to a young person in a liquid world where there's no firm anchors, no strong anchors, no firm place to stand. And so I think baby boomers project onto these young people ideological motivations. They're rejecting the Second Vatican Council, or they're fearful of change, or whatever these ridiculous phrases might be. When in fact, it's just a very straightforward human, because we are spiritual beings, a fundamental human need to have a strong anchor and a trustworthy foundation for one's life. So I find it perfectly natural. And then just don't forget, people think, oh, the young, why aren't they more progressive or whatever? Well, hello, they're rebelling against baby boomers like me who have all those ridiculous conceits. So how do you rebel against the rebellious generation? You wear a veil to church. I mean, can you imagine a university-educated woman? I mean, that is a powerful, visible sign of a rejection of fundamental tenets of feminism. Doesn't mean they don't want to be professionals. Doesn't mean they don't want to be successful in their careers. It doesn't mean they want to, go back to mythical 1950s. But it does betoken a rejection of feminist ideology, it seems to me.
Religion as the new rebellion among Gen Z is a concept we've encountered before. I asked Reno to expand on the idea.
I remember being a university professor, and one of my elderly colleagues who had grown up in Ireland, he was an Irishman, during the time when the church was all powerful. We were talking about what's the greatest challenge we face in the classroom. And he would say, Catholic fundamentalism. And I said, Mike, you're out of your mind. These students don't know anything about what the Catholic Church teaches. They don't have any basis on which to be fundamentalists. And that difference, his view versus my view, I think just says it all. That in an environment where the other people feel like they've been deprived. They gravitate towards things that are full of demands and full of teachings. And I mean, does it go too far sometimes? Of course. I think that there is a kind of traddy scrupulosity that's a vice in the church. You know, laxness is a vice, but also scrupulosity is a vice, where you overemphasize certain ritual elements at the expense of the core of the faith. And that certainly happens. But I think in anything, you have to ask yourself, do we live in an age where we're at risk? Do we live in a neo-puritanical age? I don't think so. So which risk would you want to court? And I would say we want to risk, if I was a priest or pastor, I would say, I'll take my chances on overbelief, or the wrong kind of ardent belief, because I can correct that, as opposed to unbelief or this kind of basic indifference. I mean, we're living in a time when young people, they have no views of Christianity because they don't know anything about it. Maybe they know the word, but that's about it. So you can go through the school system in the United States and in Great Britain and learn nothing about Christianity. Well, is this bad? It's bad for our society, as Tom Holland points out, because Christianity is such an important foundation of many of the things we cherish about Western culture. Bad for our culture, bad for our society. Is it bad for evangelization? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the blank slate is more open to the gospel than somebody who's been catechized in the anti-Christian mentalities of the 20th century.
Reno's words reminded me of what others have told me, that the new interest in church among Gen Z is partly down to the fact that most of them have never been to church before, and they therefore don't have the religious baggage that their Gen X and Boomer parents and grandparents have. In a secular culture, being an atheist is no longer interesting or edgy, but being religious might be. Whether it's a search for something solid in a liquid world, an unsatisfied spiritual hunger, or just old-fashioned teenage rebellion, the result is that, against all expectations, young people are returning to the Catholic Church. Tony Wilson recounted his own experience attending a traditional Catholic Mass and youth event at the start of term for the Toulouse student mission.
Like students all over the world, they all appeared at the last minute. So the cathedral, which has a capacity, I think, of around 2,000, just filled up in about 5 minutes. And so this was a mix of students who'd been part of the parish for some time. Their friends and their acquaintances were coming in. I met quite a few of them after the event. And then trumpets sounded, everyone stood up. And you get this wonderful procession coming down in this cloud of incense. This sort of procession goes down the aisle, almost floating in a cloud. And there's no doubting that you're in a moment set apart for the Lord. There's a holiness that is completely different to anything you experience in everyday life. And I think on reflection, this is part of the attraction for young people. You know, they know what a coffee shop looks like. We don't have to replicate one in church. They've got one on the corner of their street. They can go to that with their mates. They don't want that in a church. They know what a good concert feels like. They go to them all the time. They don't want that in a church. They want to be presented with something which is holy and absolutely set apart. Of course, I'm speaking in generalities. I'm sure there are lots of students who do want a church with a good coffee shop and a good, you know what I mean. But there is something attractive to these students about the fact that this is a very ancient tradition. And I think they feel that they're in a time of great turmoil. There's a lot of shifting ground. You know, we're on a continent which has war on its soil at the moment, with every prospect of that expanding. They've got a lot of pressure from social media. They've got a lot of pressure from housing costs, which in cities are similar to the UK. So many of the issues that listeners around the world will be familiar with pertain to these students as well. One of the things they're doing is they're saying, well, where is the solid ground on which I can stand? Where can I find something which is substantial, which isn't going to move, which isn't going to be different next year? There's an unchanging element to that. And I think that's where something like the Catholic Church is incredibly attractive, because it stands on a 2,000-year tradition, and it feels like it's not going anywhere quickly, and it's going to be there for them next year, and it's going to look pretty much like it looks this year. So I think that is an element. So this service sort of is a liturgical service. The music is polyphonic. It's quite modern. It's not ancient. Most of the service is in French. Some of the responses, the Agnus Dei, in Latin, and there are various other aspects in Greek. The Kyrie eleison, for example. So it's just a fairly ordinary mass, but done with extreme reverence, and that is impressive when you see that taking place with a cathedral of 2,000 people. It's quite impressive. The other thing was, there's an attentiveness from the students. I was looking around, and they are attentive at each moment. And when that moment comes of consecration, where the bishop, over the bread and wine, invokes the Holy Spirit to transform these elements into the body, blood, soul and divinity of Jesus, everyone dropped to their knees. This was a moment where we're in the presence of the King, and we give the King the respect he's due. And no one, everyone knew what they were about, what they were doing, why they were doing it. And it was one of those moments of, you just had to sit up and take notice.
For these students, Wilson says it's not just about grand ceremonies with their smells and bells. It's matched by a passion for discipleship in everyday life.
After that was over, we all spilled out into the courtyard, and it was set up more for a carnival with lots of stands for various societies, Christian societies that students can join. So it was a bit like, if anybody is familiar with Freshers' Week at university, where you have all the stalls set out with everybody vying for your attention. Well, these were exclusively Christian, and they were all the ways in which these students could become discipled. So there were theology groups, there were groups for contemplative prayer, there were charismatic praise groups, there were working with the homeless groups, there were working with youth groups. So there were no end of ways in which people could express their faith in real concrete terms by joining one or more of these particular groups. And I think Antoine said there were 60 of these that people could join. They have this concept that they call their 5 vitamins, which are about sort of prayer and reading the Bible and serving the poor, doing mission. All of these societies are about how can we give these students the vitamins they need in order to be good, functional disciples. And the aim is, by the 2 or 3 years that these students engage with the process, they will graduate. Most of them will end up somewhere else in France. Most of them will end up in a parish far less lively than the one they've been sent from. But they've been equipped with the skills to transform the atmosphere, to become missionary disciples wherever they are. And they know that's what their mission. They know their mission field is outside the church. They know ultimately they're going to be out there in a parish that probably doesn't understand them, doesn't really appreciate what it is they're bringing, but they know they've got to transform the culture wherever they end up.
Why I'm Still a Christian. After 2 decades of conversations with skeptics and atheists, the reason I believe. That's the title of my new book, and it's available now. Read My Case for Faith after a lifetime hosting debates between atheists and Christians. Find out why God makes sense of human existence, value, and purpose, and learn how to respond to some of the toughest objections to faith. This is a book to inspire confidence in Christians and to help seekers explore the claims of Christian faith. Why I'm Still a Christian is available now at justinbrierley.com, where you can also get exclusive signed copies. Or, when you become a gold level supporter of this show, you'll get a free signed copy of both my books. Click the link with today's show info to buy or to support.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome back to The Exorcist Files, a preternatural prying open of the paranormal plane. I'm your co-host Ryan Bethay, and today we wave farewell to interviews and Q&As for a time, and return to our regularly scheduled demonic demolishing programming, led by our very own priest with the catechetical feast, Father Carlos Martins.
The Exorcist Files became a hit podcast last year, with dramatized retellings of the case files of Catholic exorcist Father Carlos Martins. So why has a show that deals in demonic deliverance and spiritual warfare become so popular? In this interview, Father Martins explains why the show is doing so well with a historically non-religious demographic.
The Pew Research people, they divided the population up into segments, into demographic segments. And in the 18 to 29 category, the number of people that they surveyed that in a 5-year period abandoned religion altogether and embraced nothingism increased by 1/3. So that's just in 5 years. At the same time, that same demographic, that same age group, 18 to 29-year-olds, 63% of them stated they believe it is possible for someone to become demonically possessed. So you have two contradictory movements here. In this demographic that is increasingly abandoning religion altogether, something is happening in their lives that is making them conclude the devil is real. And no one is speaking to this. No one is reaching out to this. And so I started a process of this and, how can I speak to this? Well, so if I were to do just kind of lectures on spiritual warfare, essentially I would be attracting the same kind of people that I don't need to attract because they already believe and they already are aware of these kinds of realities. But if I were to do a dramatic 3D binaural reenactment of cases, that would likely get me some of that demographic that otherwise I would never reach them. And so that's what we did. And I knew that it wouldn't be ignored, but I never imagined it would have this explosive popularity. And so, blessed be God, it has reached not just that demographic. And, for many, many weeks, it was the #1 downloaded podcast on Spotify, which Spotify is the app of choice for that demographic that we use. So we we hit our metrics and then some. We hit a success in exactly that age group that we were going after.
Father Carlos Martins is far from the only Catholic priest finding an audience online.
Hi, I'm Father Mike Schmitz, and you're listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, where we encounter God's voice and live life through the lens of Scripture. The Bible in a Year podcast is brought to you by Ascension. Using the Great Adventure Bible timeline, we'll read all the way from Genesis to Revelation, discovering how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story. This is day 1, so let's get started.
Father Mike Schmitz's Bible in a Year podcast consistently tops the religion and spirituality charts, with the Rosary in a Year podcast not far behind. Meanwhile, popular YouTube channels such as Pints with Aquinas, the Council of Trent, and Bishop Barron's Word on Fire are all offering masses of high-quality, thoughtful, and popular content consumed by believers and seekers alike. It all underlines how the interest in the supernatural and a meaning crisis driving young people back towards faith is being met by a variety of increasingly influential online personalities ready to explain, share, and defend the Catholic faith. It seems to me that there's a fresh confidence in Catholic circles as a new generation of evangelists find their feet in both the online and offline world. And there have been plenty of high-profile conversion stories to meet it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to catechism with my daughter, and I was 45 years older than the next oldest kid. Talk about being behind.
This is comedian Rob Schneider, who came to fame through Saturday Night Live and films such as Deuce Bigalow, American Gigolo. In 2023, he converted to Catholicism.
And it was beautiful. I love it. And I think that it's always been there, just come to us, It's like Jesus was never far from me. And I think finally it really did work for me. And then why the Catholic Church works for me, anything involved with man is going to have problems, but you have to know that that's part of it, any organization. And that's going to have its flaws because it's just human beings involved in it. But if you get to the core and why the Catholic Church to me is it works for me is because it's the closest to the actual words of Jesus Christ. So you can be as close as you can to Jesus Christ. And that proximity is something that has become very important to me as you see the world spin out and as a foundation for my children. Spiritual foundation. You could build a house, but if you build a house without faith, it's like I say, it's a house on sand.
UK comedian Frank Skinner, who rose to fame alongside comedy partner David Baddiel, has also been increasingly open about his Catholic faith. He told me about walking away from faith as a young man in a devout West Bromwich family.
Leaving the Catholic Church was in our family was, if I'd come back and said I'd killed 3 people in a pub, it probably wouldn't have been a bigger deal.
Wow.
So that was very, very difficult. And then I stayed away from the church and I tried other churches. I became a faith tourist. I went to Anglican church. I tried the Christadelphians. Anyway, I tried all these things. I read every anti-Catholic thing I could get my hands on because I needed to be convinced that I'd done the right thing. And I couldn't, after about 5 or 6 years of this, I started to get this real urge to go back. And I thought, oh no, I can't. If I go back, I'm going to have to say to my family, all that torment and stuff, that was wrong. And so then I started going to church and just sitting at the back and not doing anything. And in the end, I went and saw a priest and I told him this whole story in more detail. And it's an old priest in Birmingham called Father Stibbles. But he just went, and he did this gesture of just calling me towards him. He didn't say anything. And I said, what? He said, come on. And I said, what? He said, come back. You want to come back? Just come back. What's the problem? So I went back.
So it wasn't almost all those intellectual questions getting answered, that it was someone just inviting you?
The truth is, I think it's very, very important to keep reading around it and keep asking the questions. I think there are, I don't know about other churches, but in the Catholic Church, there are adults who I would say had what I would call a gentle Jesus theology, which is still based on the stuff they did leading up to their first communion. And I don't think that's good enough. I am with St. Paul, that when I became a man, I put away childish things. You know, you have to not see through a glass darkly. You have to see as clear as you can, but you also have to accept that if I'm going to get down to the ground from this upper floor that we're on, eventually I can take all the, I can buy all the harnesses and do all the research. Eventually I'm going to have to jump. Or after that moment when I'm going to have to jump. And that's what I think about faith. It doesn't, intellectualizing about religion doesn't take us all the way. And if it did, you'd be removing a lot of people. You know, this when Jesus celebrates the fact that God has given this wisdom to these little ones, to people who aren't educated. And sometimes I see debates on the TV. You used to get like Christopher Hitchens, who was an intellectual, but who really deserved a slapping. And he would be shooting people down because they couldn't intellectualize their faith the way he could intellectualize his atheism. But that's not what it's about. It's about everybody. It has to be available to everybody. So if you can't get to it through a sort of a visceral gut feeling, you know, I went to Guadalupe, to the shrine in Mexico, and there was old ladies it's on top of a hill, crawling on their stomach up the hill.
Wow.
And at first I was shocked by it, but I thought, this is just another way of doing it. Saying, look, she's not going to maybe read the books and have all the big thoughts. She's just going to say, I really believe in this, and this is how I'm showing. I'm going to get down in the dirt and crawl up this hill to this thing. And you have to have those different levels, or you're shutting some people out.
You can hear the full conversation with Frank Skinner on Season 2 of the Re-Enchanting podcast. As we've heard in previous episodes of this series, there are plenty more celebrities, converts and influencers now wearing their Catholic faith on their sleeve. Tammy Peterson, Mark Wahlberg and Shia LaBeouf, to name just a few. And there are regular stories of evangelicals crossing the Tiber to Rome too. In 2022, well-known online apologist Cameron Bertuzzi of the Capturing Christianity YouTube channel announced his conversion to Catholicism. And just this past Easter, former guest of this show, journalist Heather Tomlinson, was received into the Roman Catholic Church. It's worth saying, today's show is not going to get into the weeds of the arguments for and against Protestant and Catholic theology. That's a debate for another day. But many of those embracing Catholicism today have been influenced by the ministry of one significant public evangelist and priest.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to host Bishop Robert Barron for this talk at Google.
And he's one of the world's most followed Catholics on social media, along with Pope Francis. And his regular YouTube videos have been viewed over 25 million times. And he recently received the YouTube Silver Creator Award.
So without further ado, let's welcome Bishop Barron.
This was Bishop Robert Barron being introduced for a lecture at the Google headquarters some 7 years ago. Since then, his online ministry has grown exponentially with some 250 million video views and almost 2 million subscribers to his YouTube channel. Word on Fire is now a global multimedia ministry featuring a team of speakers and a variety of events, courses and podcasts, as well as a publishing arm. When I chaired an onstage conversation with Bishop Barron during a UK speaking tour, I began by asking him about the secret to the success of Word on Fire. Firstly, the fact that you're so influential in your ministry, Word on Fire, on YouTube, in online spaces, where's that come from? What kind of fruit are you seeing through that?
Yeah, it's a question people ask me a lot, and I've reflected on it. I'm not sure I have a really good answer. When I started doing my work in this more kind of public evangelization, and I do YouTube videos and various things, all kinds of people said to me, "Oh no, don't do it like that. You can't be sitting in front of a bookshelf and with your Roman collar on and talking in a serious way. No one's going to listen." And this is a true story. We had a kind of a PR fellow early on, and he said, "Father, I'd recommend you should lose the collar and the bookcase and maybe come in on a skateboard." I'm not joking. And I mean, thank God I didn't do that. And they proved nevertheless to be popular. And I think it would be some combination of truth and beauty. I've been a passionate critic of the dumbed down Catholicism that I got as a kid. So my generation, I'm not sure it's true here, but it was in the States for sure. After the council, not because of the council, but after the council, we dumbed down the operation, and it was a pastoral disaster. A lot of people have disaffiliated because religion seems stupid, or it doesn't answer the challenge of science or the new atheists or whatever. So I tried to do it in a way that was smart. And then in my longer form, more like the Catholicism series, we really emphasized beauty. And my inspiration was your countryman. It was Kenneth Clark. I watched Civilization when I was a kid, and that changed my life. And I wanted to do something similar for Catholicism. So I would say some combination of truth and beauty is why it was popular.
I recently sat down again with Bishop Barron after his main stage address at the ARC conference in London and asked him about the new attitude towards sharing faith that his ministry embodies.
It feels like there's a sort of confidence that's come back, hopefully not a kind of hubris or anything like that, but something which says, actually, no, we've got a message, and people are kind of ready to hear it again.
And, you know, I'll get a little too academic here, but the source of a lot of the mischief is Friedrich Schleiermacher.
Okay.
The founder of
modern... those who don't know.
And I'll explain. The founder of modern liberal Protestantism, who writes a famous book, 1799, called On Religion, Speeches to Its Cultured Despisers. And it's a great book in the history of theology, indeed, but it set the tone for much of liberalism, both Protestant and Catholic. What's our job? Well, we've got cultured despisers out there, people that don't like us, and they don't like our message. So I got to find a way to get them to like me. That's the wrong instinct, it seems to me. I don't think St. Paul was giving speeches to the cultured despisers. Paul was announcing Jesus Christ in a culturally engaged way, to be sure. So it's not an either or. But the Schleiermacher move was more I come hat in hand to the secular culture and begging them to pay attention to me. No, Paul came into town with a message, anastasis, resurrection, Jesus rose from the dead. And so there was a kind of pandering quality to too much of Catholic life. And I think we're overcoming that. I think John Paul II, you know, as I was coming of age then, represented an alternative. I think he showed how you can evangelize in a very bold, very confident, and non-violent, non-threatening way. And someone, talk about plugged into the culture, John Paul II. So he knew how to engage the culture, but not in the Schleiermacher mode of giving speeches, hoping they'll take it seriously, but a confident proclamation.
And that Schleiermacher mode arguably was about trying to make Christianity and its supernatural claims a bit more palatable to a sort of rational Western culture. I feel almost like the reverse is now becoming true, that people need the weirdness, the strangeness of Christianity. That's actually part of its attraction.
Absolutely. And go right back, again, take Schleiermacher at the beginning of the 19th century, then about the middle of the 19th century of Kierkegaard, who says, my job as a theologian is to make Christianity hard to believe. And see, it was a typical Kierkegaard sort of move, but is to say, well, look, if it's easy to believe, it's not worth believing. Then I'm just echoing the secular culture. I'm saying what any psychologist or political activist or Oprah could say, right? But I want to make this thing strange, hard to believe. A carpenter rose from the dead, but that's my message, you know? And that has always been worth proclaiming because it's strange. Now, it doesn't mean the resurrection is an irrational message. It's not. Read N.T. Wright's 800-page book on the resurrection, to see a rational account of it if you want. But it does mean you lead with what's distinctive and boldly so about Christianity.
So I wrote a book, and you very kindly did a few episodes of your podcast looking at some of the chapters in it, called A Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. And one of the things you touched on was the rise and fall of new atheism. And my contention, my thesis has been that as much as it came in a blaze of glory, it's sort of very much waned now, that very rationalistic, scientific way of approaching things. People are looking for enchantment again, and the new atheists sort of failed to deliver that. To what extent should we be marshalling those kind of rationalistic apologetic arguments versus kind of, I don't know, giving people a story that kind of enchants them?
Well, see, I'm an always all of the above kind of guy, because I think it depends on whom you're talking to and what's on their mind. When I was teaching in the seminary, I'd say, you got to go out with like a physician with his bag and has all kinds of different medicines and treatments in there. Because it depends. Some people, like when I was a young guy, I'm 13 years old or 14 years old, and ran across the Aquinas arguments for God's existence. Changed my whole life. I was a Catholic going to Mass on Sunday, but I never thought about religion deeply at all. And then Aquinas came in, and so it appealed through my mind in a big way. Well, not everyone's like me, I get that, but that would work for me. So apologetics, yes, can play an important role. I was talking to William Lane Craig this many years ago, and we both said the same thing. He said when he was a young man, it was arguments for God's existence that really, and of course he famously articulates the Kalam argument, to this day. But we both said, everyone's always told us, oh no, that's not the way to do it. Don't use, well, in our case it worked, Now, having said that, there are a lot of other approaches. I'm a Newman man. Your countryman, John Henry Newman, I'm with him. It's the illative sense. How do you come to say, yeah, that's true? Well, argument has something to do with it, but it's often it's hunch, intuition, it's relationships, it's what other people believe and people that you admire. There's all kinds of reasons why you say, yes, I believe this. So I think the canny evangelist has got to be like a tennis player who's ready to move in any direction. Where's the ball going to go? I don't know. It could be a drop shot. It could be, I got to be able to move with my interlocutor.
Moving from these intellectual hypes to the sort of what's happening on the ground in local parishes, and whether all of these anecdotal data points about a lot of people suddenly seeming to take an interest and turning up in church, whether that's reflected in your experience.
Yeah, it is for sure. Now, there's like the ultimate goal for a Catholic of evangelization is to bring people to Mass. That's the goal. I think maybe we're not there yet. Where we are is a lot of very interested engagement in the digital world. And the church, I think, Word on Fire is an example of it, has found a way to invade that space and to become a presence within it. And I think there indeed, and I'll bring in Peterson and everybody else, a lot of young people, especially young men, have gotten reinterested in religion. I think there it's very much alive. Now, my goal is to bring them from there now into the space of the church, into the liturgy and the Eucharist. But okay, patiently in God's time. Just roaming around the expo center here, just for, 45 minutes, I think 15 different people all over the world said to me, I became a Catholic and Word on Fire had a lot to do with it. It's like, okay, that's why we do it. But see, we first had to engage them in the internet space, and that then brought them. When I was at the Youth Synod, so now we've had the Synod on Synodality, right? But prior to that, I was elected delegate to the Synod on Young People. And for weeks, we talked in the presence of the Pope, all these bishops, about young people, how do we get them more engaged? And almost everybody talked about parish programs and diocesan programs and how do we get, and I stood up at one point and said, brothers, this is not working. They're not going to come to our churches. We have to go out and get them in their space, Duc and Altum, and I'll make you fishers of men and all that. Go out in their space, and then we can reel them in, But that's been happening, no question about it. And it is reflected in the stats. Yeah. The stats are improving. We seem to have stopped the slide. We were talking a lot about disaffiliation, just sliding. That seems to have stopped anyway, in some cases reversing. But that's the work of the present moment.
And what's interesting to me is that what arguably failed to work in some versions of Catholicism that you were raised in, which perhaps tried to appeal by kind of becoming more like the everyday person. Right. It's actually the quite traditional forms of Catholicism that seem to be attracting young people against all our expectations. What's going on there? What's the appeal there?
Well, I'll go back to my own time. You're right. I mean, when I was coming of age, it was, guitars and tambourines, and let's sing, 3-chord folk songs. And because we want to be relevant, we want the kids to like us. But the trouble with that was it was just a very, very faint echo of the entertainment culture of the time. And so people said, well, heck, I get much better entertainment on television or somewhere else. Where the church being itself, speaking a message that can't be heard anywhere else. So that's the pulpit question. Is the pulpit just a place where I'm hearing an echo of the secular culture, political or otherwise? And then there's the whole liturgical, doctrinal. Are we saying something and exhibiting something that you cannot find in the ordinary cultural space? That will be interesting to people. And that's what's happening, I think, is the more we emphasize, as you say, the weirdness of Christianity in its doctrinal claims, in its manner of presenting itself to the world, it'll be more compelling, not less. But believe me, we all ran off that cliff, the Schleiermacher cliff of let's give speeches to our culture despisers. Let's make ourselves appealing on their own terms, to young people. I go back to my nephew, a brilliant guy. He went to MIT. Now he's working at SpaceX, sending rockets to Mars. But when he was a little kid, he went through religious education. And most of his teachers were very much in the Schleiermacher mode. He had one teacher in one of his grades who was tough, taught them the Bible in its peculiarity and distinctiveness, insisted they learn. Well, of course, that's the only teacher he remembers. Of course, that's the only one that had an impact on him. So I think we have to resist the Schleiermacher intuition, but man, it was deep in the Catholic psyche.
And when you see these, especially these young men, against all expectations, embrace, what are they coming for? What is it that they haven't found in the culture, which suddenly they discover to their surprise is there in the liturgy, the tradition, the worship, and the community of, say,
supernatural. The supernatural, I would say. They're finding the supernatural. They're finding something other. God's described as totaliter aliter, totally other. They're finding the sacred. They're finding the mysterium tremendum et fascinans. I mean, they're finding the heart of religion. But it's the naturalizing of all that led to the disaffiliation, I think, that boredom. That leads to a bored religion, tired religion. They want the supernatural because they were built for the supernatural. That's the weird paradox at the heart of Christian anthropology is by nature, we're ordered to the supernature. By nature, we're ordered to something that we can't acquire on our own. So it's the breakthrough of the unconditioned, the breakthrough of the sacred, God speaking. Those are all just metaphors for the same thing, right? But that's what they want and what they're seeking because they can't find that in the secular culture. And see, we have ways in our genius of signaling that, and that's where vestments and incense and song and chant, and that's where all that comes in. It's meant to awaken that supernatural sensibility. But see, again, when I was coming of age, all that was de-emphasized on purpose. Don't have weird chanting hymns, have, 3-chord folk songs. Don't have fancy vestments, make them as kind of like burlap as possible. Don't have a distinctive liturgy, make it more like a, jamboree. All bad instincts, seems to me. And so what young people are finding is when we do the opposite, it's attractive to them.
This perhaps is the key to the success of Barron's message and Word on Fire ministry, drawing on the intellectual case for faith through great thinkers in the church's history such as Augustine and Aquinas, but meeting it with the real-life experience of sacraments, worship, and the miraculous. Bringing together the head and the heart is a recipe for success. And by the way, later in this season, look out for a new live conversation between myself, Bishop Barron, and the New Testament scholar and former Anglican Bishop of Durham, N.T. Wright. The growing attraction to the weirdness of high church Catholicism, with its emphasis on miracles, saints, the real presence of Jesus in the Mass, and all that goes with it, is reflected in the fact that when young people do tend to go to church, they're often opting for something mysterious, otherworldly, and supernatural. Indeed, the UK's Quiet Revival research shows that, as well as returning to the Catholic Church, the other stream that young people are most likely to choose is Pentecostalism and charismatic expressions of church. This trend was perhaps anticipated by historian Tom Holland when, in our live London conversation last year, he advised the gathered church leaders present to stop being timid and embrace the supernatural.
They don't 100% have the courage of their convictions. Whereas it's the people who are saying, the Spirit speaks to me, I talk in tongues, alleluia, healings, whatever. That's unusual, that's unexpected. People might sit up and say, well, that really is unexpected. Or churches where you have a palpable sense of the sublime, visions of the Virgin, all that kind of stuff. Again, that's weird and odd and unexpected, and not the kind of thing that you would get on Radio 4. So I think that churches have to major on what they have to offer that everyone else doesn't. I think the problem for Christianity is that it's been too successful. Basically, everyone has accepted its essential principles. You get them all. Everyone should be, be kind to the poor and all this kind of thing. Everyone buys into that. The things that the church traditionally did, education, hospital, poor relief, this has all been nationalised. So what is there left for the churches to do? What there is left for the churches to do is to talk about the stuff that no one else is talking, which is all the supernatural stuff.
At a recent Unheard event, another former show guest, Paul Kingsnorth, also expressed why it is churches in the mushy middle that are most likely to get left behind.
So we're in a time where lots of middle-of-the-road things are just disappearing. Whereas, as I say, in the past, when I was young, everything could kind of muddle along because things mostly worked, and now things don't work, and they're going to work a lot less over the next 10 or 20 years. And so if you are looking for a religious truth, you're going to go somewhere where it really seems to be happening, not just something that sort of is a bit meh. There's no point in it. If you want something that's a bit meh, you might as well just stay at home and watch the TV, or I don't know. There's no point. Religion, if religion doesn't radically change you and connect you to the truth, then it's a waste of your time. That's the point of it. Otherwise, it's just, why get out of bed on a Sunday morning and go all the way to church and stand up for 2 hours? You'd be better off just having a nice breakfast. So you only do this if you think it's really going to change you, because you need to be changed. So I think that's true. And as things get more desperate, as the void gets more like a howling nihilistic mess, that's going to be the question. Where do I go to find the truth? Seraphim Rose said, he had something about that. He said, Christ is the only exit from this world. He said, all of the other exits that people try, sexual rapture, political activism, they lead to the kind of the graveyard of, it's like you have to go for the truth and you have to look for it. And that's what people are doing now.
Tony Wilson, who has been charting the growth of Catholicism among students in France, is himself a convert to the Catholic Church from a charismatic evangelical background. But when he entered the Roman Catholic Church, after being persuaded by theological arguments, he found that the charismatic work of the Spirit was also alive and well there. Indeed, charismatic Catholic renewal is one of the fastest growing parts of the Church. Wilson says that the students he meets are attracted by both the theology of the Church and its openness to the reality of the supernatural, including spiritual evil.
The Catholic Church has a rich heritage of confronting Satan and the demonic, and has a pretty robust system of dealing with that. Every Catholic parish has an exorcist. The bishop is the person who gives the authority to work as an exorcist, and they do their testimonies are incredibly vivid testimonies. There's no getting away from that. But I would say that actually you don't get more charismatic than the Mass. The Mass, if you really, really believe, and this is the place I got to, and once I got to the place where I believed this, there was no way I wanted to be anywhere else. But if you get to the point where you believe that Jesus Christ in body, blood, soul and divinity is turning up on the altar and is gifting himself to you in what is effectively a marriage rehearsal, the bride and the lamb that we see in Revelation. There's that sense in which we're being called to the front and our bridegroom waits for us. And that ultimate marriage which we have to wait for in heaven, we get a little precursor of that. We get a little marriage rehearsal every Sunday, and he's turning up to be with us. Now, you don't get much more miraculous than that if you hold a very, very high view of what's happening at the Eucharist. And so that, I think, is an element as well, the sense that the Catholic Church does believe in miracles.
I asked Bishop Barron about entering a new, more confident era of evangelism.
What's your advice now to the church? If there is, I would argue this meaning crisis in the culture, people looking for a better story, people opening up to the possibility of the supernatural, how does the church reap the harvest that is evidently there?
Keep preaching the Bible on its own terms. There I am with Karl Barth, the great Protestant theologian, that he didn't want to translate the Bible into some other language. Let the Bible be the Bible. It's a thicket it's like a jungle, the Bible. It's weird and wonderful and mysterious and dangerous. Fine, in we go. Go into that, guide people through it. Don't try to translate all that into something more accessible. So in our preaching, be bold and be deeply biblical. Fulton Sheen said that, the great American, preacher. His first rule of preaching, and it seems too obvious even to state, but he said, be biblical. But see, in my time, priests, we were kind of discouraged from being biblical. Take a couple ideas from the Bible, and then talk about your vacation, or talk about something that will be relevant to people. No. Get them into the thick jungle of the Bible and its characters and strangeness, and So I'd say that. And then liturgically, I let it be strange and colorful and evocative of a higher world. Speak our moral teaching boldly, because it shouldn't just be utterly congruent with the latest psychological intuitions. What'll make me happy? Well, the psychologists say this. Yeah, but God has said that. Yeah. Stay with that. Now, there'll be overlap, to be sure. There will be. But don't psychologize our moral teaching. Let it be true on its own terms.
Barron's advice strikes me as relevant to people of all church denominations. But with a new leader at the helm of his own church, what are his hopes for the future?
I think the church that we've been talking about, so let's say we got the Schleiermacher approach and then the anti-Schleiermacher. To my mind and in my experience, the anti-Schleiermacherians are the more lively part of the church. If you want to see where the church is really cooking, it's in that Newman rather than Schleiermacher. Let's say Chesterton rather than Schleiermacher. I think that's where you find the life. And that's what I would do. I would say, look, where's the life? Now let's follow that. Go with that path.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
This episode is brought to you by Buick. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Buick Certified Service Fresh Start Tire Event. Visit Buick.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only, highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
So I went to a Church of England school, and had the usual sort of PSE, Christian hymns in assembly, that sort of thing. I knew the Lord's Prayer off by heart, but from quite a young age, I made the decision that God was not real. I was an atheist from about the age of 12, I believe. So it started quite early.
This is Mark Baldwin, a deep thinker who grew up in a non-religious household where the only connections to church were negative. As we conclude today's episode, I want to bring you in on our conversation about his journey to faith and finding his way into the Catholic Church. But as he told me, he had very little to go on from his childhood religious education at school.
We didn't explore any theology, we didn't explore the evidence for God, the evidence for the resurrection or for Jesus' life. We didn't explore the Gospels, really. We just sang songs and watched videos. So it was only really when I was an atheist I started grappling with the Bible as a way of arguing against it. I actually got face-to-face with actual Christian belief. And partly through your podcast too, actually. I listened to Unbelievable. I think it was Alison McGrath you had on, who I listened to in response to get a balanced perspective on Richard Dawkins, because I thought, I should get both sides. So that was the background to that.
So did you start to at any point question your kind of atheist assumptions in that way?
I was pretty sure of my atheism right until my conversion, but I wasn't sure of my materialism. That was the big change. So I was very into Greek philosophy and Buddhism. And through a mixture of both Neoplatonists, the Stoics, and Zen Buddhism, I came to basically believe that mind came before matter, that mind was the basic substrate of reality.
Where did that come from then? Where did this interest in Greek philosophy and Buddhism specifically come from?
Well, I was very interested in personal development, and as a lot of people who are and want to have some kind of wisdom tradition, I went to Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus. I was also interested in well-being and meditation, and I practiced Zen Buddhist meditation. I'd come to believe in a kind of atheistic trinity, so three aspects of reality. One I called the source, which I philosophically agreed must exist as a first cause, but I didn't think it was a conscious entity you could pray to. The second was the Logos Sophia, or the word wisdom, which I got from Greek philosophy. So a kind of combination of the Greek Logos tradition and the wisdom tradition. This aspect of reality through which reality is held together and made intelligible. And then thirdly, the presence, which I experienced in meditation, which was this sense of, there was a sense of communing with something. And I would call it the universe in this sort of pantheistic sense, or something like that. Or the Tao from Taoism. Yeah, so I had this atheistic trinity.
I asked Mark what led him to move from this rather cerebral atheist trinity of existential concepts to encountering a living faith in the Logos made flesh, Jesus Christ.
It is a big difference, and I think the essential difference is relationship. That's the difference between the two. And for me, that started with reading the Gospel of John. So I read the Gospel of John to disprove that the Logos became flesh, the Word became flesh. And I just got lost in it. And I found the Jesus of John so compelling, so humble, so powerful, so different to the Jesus I've been presented by Christians. So they try and water it down as a kind of Western Buddha, or like a wise man, or like just a nice guy that you should follow. Not as the Word incarnate, not as the very entity through which reality is held together and made intelligible, and is in essence good, which is very good news, literally. And so I got lost in the Gospel of John. I found the language beautiful, and I've been primed for it in a way by reading Greek philosophy, because that's the milieu that John was writing into, and that's probably why he uses the word logos in Hellenistic Judaism and Greek philosophy. And so I was living in a National Trust property in Wiltshire, and I had this huge garden to walk around, so I thought I'd go on a nice long walk and try and make sense of things. As I mentioned before, I was a Zen Buddhist. On the walk, I experienced a moment of sudden enlightenment, which is called satori in Zen Buddhism. So it's like a sudden awakening experience. And out of nowhere, I just looked up and said, "Thank you, Lord." And that was it. I was saying thank you to somebody. That was the beginning of the relationship. I mean, there's already a one-sided relationship before that, but that was the first time I ever said thank you to God. And it was like something burst within me. I was filled with a sensation like running water, just this like overwhelming joy. I just kept saying, "You're real, I can see you." And I found a bench, cried my eyes out, because there was also a lot of conviction. So I realized I've been living in active rebellion against God, not just not believing, but actively warring against him. And I just gave myself to Jesus, and I had no idea what to do. I hadn't been baptized, obviously. I had no community. I didn't belong to a church. I didn't have really any true understanding of the Bible, except what I got from reading the start of the Gospel of John, and cherry-picked bits and pieces from over the years. And I was kind of, and my partner was an atheist. My friends were atheists. We actually broke up after 10 years because she couldn't stand the thought of me converting to Christianity, and so I basically lost a girlfriend getting to God. Yeah, it was a big time change, and I went back to be with my family in Cambridge and to explore Christianity. Lots of churches in Cambridge. I've tried out pretty much every denomination going, and I love them all in different ways, actually. Yeah, so the essential difference between my atheistic, philosophical kind of logos thing and Christianity was a relationship. That was the big change, this two-way relationship.
As Mark says, he found his way into several different churches. He's worked for a charismatic Anglican church since his conversion, and he has friends across traditions. But as he continued to work out his faith, it led him to the Catholic Church, where he has seen other young people make their home.
I often attend the Latin Mass in Cambridge, Our Lady of English Martyrs, and you see a lot of young people there, and all the women that are veiling, there is a hunger for traditional liturgy. And there's also, there are two traditions I think are drawing people in. One is the more traditional liturgy, and then on the other side, you've got people like the Franciscan friars of the renewal, who are charismatic Catholics. The mysticism with it, but they're both emphasizing the direct experience of the presence of God. I think there's also a hunger for authenticity in a world of superficiality and surface detail. And, the Orthodox Church is doing quite well as well and growing quite rapidly. And I think for the same reasons. I found it very useful. I find my faith has really deepened since stepping into Catholicism. I still love charismatic worship. I still love my Protestant brothers and sisters. And, I think there's almost a kind of dialectic going on between the different wings of the church. We're kind of all perfecting each other and growing in response to each other.
Mark says he is now considering a vocation within the Catholic Church, but in the end, as Mark told me, whether they find their home in the Catholic Church as he has, or somewhere else, those who are moving towards Christ are doing so because, like him, they're looking for meaning, purpose, and a true identity.
I went from being a historical accident and just the result of random mutations and chance to being a loved and created being with purpose, which is what I was hungering for. Some kind of deeper, like poetic and philosophical context, a story to be a part of, and also a shared identity. I suddenly had, billions of brothers and sisters all over the world. And there was a lot of kind of like humbling myself before God and realizing, I'm not the center of the universe. I'm not the creator of meaning. I'm not the main character in the story, the story of creation. Jesus is. And in a way that was very liberating because it took the pressure off. And I realized, if I mess things up, it's not the end of the world. I used to suffer very terrible depression every winter, and I haven't done for the last 5 years. So I've been to Christmas for 6 years, I haven't had stopping depression for 5 years, which is a miracle. I can work full time, and it's amazing. And I'm sure that part of that was the existential dread, but also the fact that I felt there was a higher purpose, and on my own power and my own will, I thought I was doomed to fail. But whereas with the power of God and the will of God and the power of prayer and the community that forms around you when you do step into a church community, it feels like you can overcome a lot more, I think. And there's no despondency and nihilism. Obviously, there's still struggles, but yeah, I just felt that I wasn't doing life on my own.
There is a surprising rebirth of belief in God underway. As we explored in the early episodes of this season, there are some complex, sometimes contradictory political and cultural motivations in play as vibe shifts and social trends change the landscape of faith. But I'm reminded by Mark's story that, in the end, the rebirth is also simple, because it happens one life at a time. However people are arriving at the doors of our churches, the same invitation to repentance, sacrifice, and life in all its fullness needs to be extended. I'm also encouraged by Mark's ability to enter the Catholic Church while retaining close ties with brothers and sisters in other Christian traditions. It's a reflection of how different the relationship between Protestants and Catholics is today compared to the past. While tensions still exist in certain communities and sincere theological differences remain, even in my lifetime, I've seen a growing willingness for Catholics and Protestants to work together and focus on what unites rather than divides them. And this new era of the Catholic Church finding its confidence again is a reminder to us all that rebirth is happening. But are we ready to respond? You've been listening to The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God with me, Justin Brierley, continuing to tell the story of why many secular 21st century people are considering Christianity again. As ever, please do rate and review the podcast and share it with others. This podcast is also a book. You can read chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. And in addition, I'll also send you the first chapter of my new book, Why I'm Still a Christian. And before we wrap up, a reminder that, hey, the fact is I can't do any of this without your help. If you'd like to help me reach many more people with thinking faith, please consider becoming a monthly supporter of my work. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. The links are with the show notes. Coming up next time.
In my experience, the people that are showing up at church or that I have conversations with, many of them, that's not the question that's on their mind is, does God exist? But for many people, the way that I would describe it is they're not so much concerned about whether God exists or not. They want to know what they can do about the demons that they actually are experiencing.
Catholics aren't the only historic church stream experiencing renewal. We'll be exploring the Orthodox Church boom and reports of parishes surprised to find themselves bursting at the seams. Why are so many attracted to the deep, symbolic, and often mysterious liturgy of this ancient church? But don't forget, you can listen to that episode right now when you become a silver or gold supporter. Again, the links are with the show notes, where you can also find links to all today's guests and archive material. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance by Isaac Simmons. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Jif peanut butter. It's that jiffing good, it doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. Ooh, it's that Jiffing good. Get your Jiff at jiff.com.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Don't be left in the dark. Find out about our latest shows, upcoming events, and recent articles by subscribing to my Think Faith newsletter. It'll arrive once a fortnight, and I'll even send you the first chapters of both my books, Why I'm Still a Christian and The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, for free when you sign up. And if you want to support this show, you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content when you become a silver supporter. Gold level supporters also get signed copies of both those books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me. Your support makes a huge difference. The links for the newsletter or to support are with the show info, or go to justinbrierley.com.